Well, I've coped with the technology. Graham's not here today. I came in at 3 o'clock to see how the system works. Those awful days when you bring a laptop and a projector and then find the laptop even speak to the projector. Right. So at least I'm not doing slides in the wrong way round.
Or you take out the magazine and turn it, then all fall out.
Oh yeah, that always is.
I remember those days of overhead transparencies as well.
Yeah.
Slap these
Yeah.
films on,
And you couldn't leave them on the truck there for too long, could you?
because they're all getting buckled and warm.
Sort of almost going back to psychedelic times when it all bubbles up.
Mind you, I can remember when I started teaching and to produce worksheets, we had a bander machine, those rotary,
Yes,
where you
yeah.
had to put some sort of chemical into them,
Yeah.
and you'd stand over it. Well, after about 50, you were getting really quite high in front of the class, turning this wheel.
We used to have dye line printing, making AO size
Big, yes,
things, groupings.
yes.
And of course with those you get the smell, and if the extractor hasn't been turned on,
Yeah.
you can see the people sort of starting to almost go into slow motion in the print.
Aye, it's
Quite dangerous, really.
I mean, they're all forbidden now, aren't they, the chemicals and smells?
Yeah.
Graham's left me a mobile number. He's at a wedding. He said if something goes terribly wrong, call this number.
You're going to get a slurred message, aren't you?
Right.
Is this one still going to be recorded?
Yes, I think it's. I pressed the button, so it should be.
Sent them an email.
It's supposed to be recorded.
Do you know when you're doing the next one of these? Because I've got about 3 people that would like to come to this after I've been selling it to them.
It's up to the college if they want me to.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
I did one in September, this one in May, so.
I think they have got one in September because I work over at the college and I
It would be nice to know.
what's going on, and I think there is
Yeah.
one planned for
Right, okay.
September.
I won't be here, not next week, the week after. You're coming over, so we're all going out Thursday night. And you're here. Going out for an Indian.
Well, it's. Yeah. These things happen.
If he's not here in 2 weeks' time, you know where he is.
Okay.
Oh, this is the hill zone.
Yeah, Yupp's coming over and he's taking us all for an Indian
Right.
on Thursday,
Yeah.
the 17th.
Oh. How is he?
All right.
Good.
Yes. Does my head in sometimes, but he's fine. I'm sure I do his head in as well. But there's that language barrier,
It is.
because he asked me if I could change it to 7 o'clock, but he asked Wednesday, then he said, can we do Thursday? And I said 6:30, then he said,
Yeah.
what's to change to 7? And I said, oh, for God's sake, don't make me change it again. So I got an email saying, as you won't change it, can I have the response number?
Yeah.
So I didn't say I wouldn't change it, I just said, why do you want to
Yes,
change it?
he's misunderstood
Yeah.
the nuance.
We always clash heads, he calls me naughty because I tell him
So which one are you going to?
panache.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I quite like zeros, but the acoustics are so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at a table, I can't hear people on their own table,
Yeah,
so all to do with getting older, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So if I tell the other 3 that they're doing one in September, they're making them all
Yeah, I think the one that starts June time, so for the next courses.
if the college would actually let me know the dates that I'm supposed to be doing this, it would help.
Yeah, I might ask if I can come to the two
Yeah,
that I
and
missed.
that's the other end.
And if we could have some publicity. I mean, the previous one was well advertised, this one. Just,
And I worked there, and I only come across it by chance.
Are you district,
oh,
John, are you district councillor as well as town?
yeah.
Because like, we've got that Yammer thing now, haven't we? And I advertised it on there the other day, saying how brilliant it was. And I
Oh,
wish
right.
I'd done history with you at school now instead of like.
Right, yeah, I'm hoping it's the social media things.
It's like a notice board, but it's
Oh, right.
for the whole internal council. And there's quite a few likes on that.
Oh,
That's the bottom of it.
I mean, I've just fairly recently gone on to Facebook Western now and then, or then and now.
Yeah.
I think that's where I saw you, and I've got all this guy and
Oh,
some
right.
few like
You've got some
debates and that, and I
Yeah.
thought, oh yeah, it sounds interesting, which is
But I get really cheesed off with some of the comments.
I got banned, I did.
It's all moan.
I got banned because of the comment I got about the homeless people, because I work with them. I got banned, but she really stopped it now.
I think it was down the side here.
Right, how are we doing? It's great, it's 7. Let's start. Da-da-da, number 3. Why don't we just have a switch that goes up and what am I supposed to do? I can't switch the lights off.
We'll come back on again.
I'm tempted to look for the fuse box and just pull it out.
I think it's just a delay on it. Is that right?
Come on, you're in charge.
No.
no, it's a bit too modern for.
Yeah, the front ones have just
Okay,
gone
well,
up. Yeah, the front ones have just gone up.
everyone happy with the facts? Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, then off we go to let's see if I've got the right. Good, I have got it working. Right. I'm going to look at the way in which Weston has changed from being a small town, a large village, small town, controlled by the squirearchy, into something which is much more democratic. So it's laying the foundations for what we now have. So it's a move from control by Grove House, the lord of the manor, the squire, the vestry, the church, that unelected establishment into what is a much more democratic organisation. So the rise of Western democracy. You'll notice I've used the colour of each party I can think of, so there's no prejudice coming into it. It looks a bit like Google, doesn't it, I'm afraid. The whole thing starts really with the 1842 Act. An Act of Parliament is passed for specifically to allow a new local authority to pave, light, watch, that means police, cleanse and other improvements, and to establish a market. So this act is passed, but in order to enforce it or to create it, they have to create an organisation of people to do it. And so Parliament creates what are called the Improvement Commissioners. Nowadays we call them councillors. And these are the first, not exactly democratically elected by today's standards, more appointed people, eventually elected. And their job is to use this act to do what they want to do, to improve Weston and cause those who pay rates to cough up for the benefit of it. So you can imagine the squire did not appreciate this. those who were in business wanted the benefit, but they didn't want to pay either. It was the same old thing, exactly the same today. But they appointed a man, Francis Hutchinson Synge, rather grand name, as the chairman, and Henry Davis, a local lawyer, as clerk. So this really is the beginning of the change in Weston. And we begin to see these urban institutions, as I call them, beginning to rise. But it's not exactly an easy move, because even though you allow people to take more control of their own destinies, within those groups you'll still have a hierarchy developing. And so I can think of no better analogy than John Cleese and the two Ronnies. You know, I'm up there looking down on him, he's there looking up to me but down on him, and he, poor thing, down there is looking up to everyone, and there's nobody for him to look down on. And it's all about climbing ladders, giving people senses of their own importance, and a process which we all still understand to this day. The development of civic pride, that was something which just did not exist, because nobody could take an active role in the way their communities were run. Suddenly, from the passing of that act, they can. That brings its social characteristics. Religion then, which nowadays doesn't really count in terms of social organisation, because nobody's really that worried whether you go to church or not, and they're certainly not worried which particular church you go to. But in those days, it was important, and therefore we can't just poo-poo it. It's the sort of church you went to tended to signify your class or your outlook. Cultural changes, the growth of professions, not least of all in Weston, the growth of banking, architecture, law. These were growing middle-class professions rather than upper-class roles. Education, that came in Weston-super-Mare very reluctantly. People feared that if you give people too much education, they might rise above themselves and take over. And so education was considered by some people to be really rather dangerous. And we became protective. Clearly, all societies need to protect themselves, and if they can't protect themselves, then they need to invent a structure which will protect them on their behalf, i.e. police. So this is all part of that early or mid-19th century development. And let's look at just 6 people in Weston. We have this wonderful collection in the museum of Weston worthies, small paintings that were created of fairly ordinary people. It's very easy to look in museums and art galleries at all the great and the good, but here is a wonderful collection of ordinary people in Weston who were instrumental in really getting the town off the ground as a place for ordinary people. And these are just half a dozen of them. Cornelius Hancock, well, a property owner, not a man who had inherited wealth, but a man who, through his own ingenuity, saw a niche market and began to develop in Weston. Mr. Kingdon, who was the postmaster. Of course, in those days, being the postmaster was considered rather being like the station master and the schoolmaster, part of the new replacement aristocracy. Samuel Searle, a brickmaker. He was responsible for the potteries in Locking Road, which then moved into what became Winterstoke Road, the Royal Pottery. Now, if you're going to be a brickmaker in a place which is growing and there's going to be a need for bricks, then you're clearly there to make money, and he did make money. Thomas Rogers, one of the first hoteliers, Royal Hotel, get my bearings right. Charles Phillips, another brickmaker. John Gregory, a local carpenter, again, part of these trades. The growth of trade was a new concept during this era. And in the museum today, all those pictures are on display, together with, if you've not seen them, today's Weston worthies. Not the great and the good, not councillors, but the people who are roughly equivalent in trade to the work which was being done then, or in trade or occupation. So you can see modern people, and one of the vendors of food from those days has been replaced by the man who runs poppadoms. That's a vendor of food. That's the way it is. Yeah. So, and of course we see the growth of the shopping instinct. Up until this era, shops didn't exist. The earliest visitors to Weston, if they wanted to buy something, you would have to go to a farmhouse or a baker or somebody who came around hawking things. There were no shops. People couldn't see the point of shops. You made what you wanted, or you got somebody around the corner to run it up for you. Gradually, though, we began to see the growth of shops. Once you saw the growth of shops, you saw the growth of a demand to use those shops. Then you saw the growth of fashion to use the shops, and people being induced to buy things which they didn't necessarily want, but it was fashionable to acquire it. And it's the world we live in today, isn't it? We're bombarded all the time by clever advertisers telling us what we ought to buy rather than what we need to buy. And that's the world that was being created here. This is Walker and Ling's, one of the earlier shops in High Street. And of course, with the invention of cheap plate glass, you begin to see the ability to display your goods. Up until then, glass was terribly expensive, and so you had very little of it. And the earlier shops indeed had no glass. They had shutters, hardwood shutters, and a bench on the outside, so you put your displays or your food on the outside, then bring it all in at night time, lock up, and no windows at all. So the earlier shops would have looked a bit like, I don't know, going down Meadow Street today, where people put the shutters down to stop people lobbing bricks through their windows. Just a different format. So here is Mr. Francis Hutchinson Synge, first gentleman, looking very grand. I think I mentioned last week, I thought this picture is telling us a number of things. I mean, there he is with that Act of Parliament rolled up in his hand. I've got this. I am here on behalf of the people. He's got the pen, the quill there to write things. This is the way we're going to do things. And looking out through the window across the squire's land, he is quite clearly here to tell the squire now how to behave. And no longer are Weston people going to be told what to do by the Smith Pigots, not just in Weston but across the country. Henry Davis, who becomes the clerk, now he's an interesting person. He's a solicitor. He becomes clerk to the Improvement Commissioners, but he was also a speculative developer. He created Oriel Terrace, Royal Crescent. When he died at the end of the 19th century, his widow gave land to create Clarence Park. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but it was on condition. Everybody goes on about how Mrs. Rebecca Davis was a great philanthropist, giving Weston this land that her husband had owned, but it was on condition that she got planning permission to build houses all the way around it, which only had small front gardens, so people could then go out into Clarence Park as their, as it were, front garden. And it was on condition the council agreed to take the land over for public ownership in perpetuity. And so here she made a handsome amount of money out of that arrangement. And there's a plaque on the gate going into Clarence Park telling us, extolling the virtues of this wonderful woman, who was a pretty shrewd businesswoman, as her husband had been. Nowadays, of course, if the town clerk happened to be a speculative property developer, all sorts of eyebrows would be raised, and it would not be permitted today. But so, was he profiteering from his position, or was he not? And if he was, did it do any harm? I don't have the answers to those questions. I just pose those questions. It's the way that Victorians worked. The only problem with the creation of the town, which had been created, is that the half of the parish of Weston Supermare fell into what we would then call the town. And the landowners who were just outside the town area of the parish simply refused to pay their rate. And there was nothing could be done to stop them. Imagine today if people living in Milton said, oh, we're not paying the Western rate. Well, there'd be court cases, you'd have to pay, properties would be sequestrated. That didn't happen. So the first meeting of the new commissioners, 7th of May 1842, meeting in a pub. Because there was nowhere else to meet, there were no council offices. So first meeting in a pub. Then in the gas committee room, which I've always joked that councillors meeting in something called the gas room is probably indicative of something. So 1848, I'll just go through these very quickly. The chairman is thanked in that overpouring of verbosity the Victorians loved. This is a quote. The chairman thanked for his great liberality, his kindness and his public spirit in the erection of so commodious and convenient a building as the new town hall, which he has provided at so great a personal sacrifice for the use of the public. New town hall? Well, yeah, it was a former chapel behind High Street, which had become redundant, and he acquired it, and that is where the council met. But it also doubled up as a bit of a concert hall and a bit of a bar. But it's where the council could meet. So 1851, the Improvement and Market Act is passed. Then various other acts. 53, the Waterworks Act. 56, the Cemetery Act. 56, plans for a new town hall above the Market House. 57, another town hall is proposed on what is the site now of Lloyd's Bank. Then 1858, plan for a new town hall. There are people complaining it's out of the town. It's actually the town hall we now have. 59, the town commissioner has become the Board of Health. You can see the wherewithal to control the place is growing. And if it's growing, then they need to employ people to carry out these things. 1861, the bits of land that are beyond that side, beyond the town, come into this new town. So the Whitecross estate comes under the Commissioner's jurisdiction. All the time, this simply shows how local government is beginning to grow. Parliament passes an act giving the authority the ability to do things, and it then does them. Parliament passes more acts, more to do, and so it goes on, right up until the same process today, where Parliament gives councils today the option to do things, or it obliges them to do things. And 9 times out of 10 nowadays, councils do things because they're obliged to and don't have any money to do the optional things. So this is the start of it all. So the first town hall, as it were, is behind the Plough Hotel. Now nobody here will remember the Plough Hotel because it was demolished in 1937 and replaced by Marks and Spencer's. So the facade there, this is exactly the same position. The Plough was the second hotel, or third hotel after the Royal, the Imperial, which was the Bath Hotel, and the Plough. So that behind there were lots of little alleyways behind, and that's where this little town hall was. This map, it shows that this is High Street, this is Big Lamp Corner, Regent Street, Meadow Street. Now, this is where Marks and Spencer's is today. So that's where, and there were lots of little alleyways that went around the back. This is the big house that I showed you before, which became the post office and is now the Sovereign Centre. This is the alleyway that went down, and the little entrance to it is still there at the side of Cecil Walker's shop, but you can't go any further. It's the old Royal Arcade, which is bottom. That's off the screen, it will change that. And there were lots of little cottages down and alleyways. Because again, it predates the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947, so people just build. If you owned land, you built. And buildings were so close to each other because there weren't cars going down alleyways, just people. So an alleyway might have been no wider than this. It didn't matter. The idea of building another town, a new town hall, occurred in this location, 1856, on the site which is now the Playhouse. So, but this had become the market. In 1827, Richard Parsley, who I think I mentioned before, he owned White Cross House, which is the Georgian house that's the church hall at the back of Victoria Methodist Church. That was his estate. Now, Richard Parsley, he's one of these early speculative developers. He established the market. This predates shops. So this is where people came and slaughtered their animals, gutted them, sold things, people came in to buy vegetables. So it was a proper market. And it was where the current Playhouse is, which is why the pub opposite is the Market Inn. The market is opposite. And this indeed was the market. It was rebuilt by Hans Price in 1900 when he developed this lovely terrace, Somerset buildings, before all this sort of nasty modern stuff went in. This was the entrance to the Market House. The Market House, when it closed, was converted into the Playhouse. Nothing changed, it was just a big empty shed, as you'd expect a market house to be, so they just put up some drapes and imitation walls, and it became our theatre. So that was the Playhouse, as indeed a fair number of us will remember, until it decided to burn down in 1965, 6, 7, 8, something like that. And I shouldn't say it's funny, but there's a certain irony. You look at the show which is on. No Time for Love. Well, of course not. It's hot stuff there. It's all going up in flames. And how many of us will remember these fire engines? The Green Goddesses, the old auxiliary fire service from the war, which they carried on using in Western right up until, well, I can remember as a youngster, as a teenager, in green fire engines. But that was the end of the old Market House and the Playhouse. The building was gutted. Insurance would only pay up if a replacement theatre was built on exactly the same site, which is why the Playhouse is rather oddly shaped. They've done quite well to get it tucked in on that site, which was never intended to be a theatre. This was the inside. You see, that's the route down into the Market House, and you can see the window shapes there, the windows there. And this is looking back through, all completely destroyed. So that's where people gathered to do their shopping as the place began to develop. Then there was an idea, well, if we can't build there, let's build it on this site. A house had been pulled down and they were going to build here, 1857. That came to nothing. I mean, plans, people today, people always, when somebody proposes something and it doesn't actually work out, oh, blame them, blah, blah, blah. But there's a whole history of things being proposed and never actually leaving the drawing board. So here's our third attempt to get a town hall, 1857. Now, this is part of the era when people are, as I said earlier, are getting very proud about their little towns. They want to show off. And one good way to show off is to build a town hall. I mean, look at some of those north of England town halls, Manchester. You know, these are bigger than Parliament. This is municipal showing off to the nth degree. It wasn't just for showing off, it was about, well, it was. It wasn't necessarily personal, it was about showing your town, your city, is actually better than the one down there. So 1857 came to nothing. Fourth and final plan was accepted. This is the 1856 creation. Interesting idea. They brought in a person called James Wilson, who was an architect in Bath. So that's a good thing, isn't it? You know, Bath, very, very prestigious place. So if you're a successful architect there, come into Weston, we'll give you a contract here. And £3,000 was spent building the Weston Town Hall, which opened on 3rd of March, 1859. And you can see from this print that the guts of that, or rather the whole of that, form the guts of the present town hall. It has changed somewhat over the years as as the services have grown. But it was hugely controversial. This is just to show you the architect James Wilson. He came to Weston to build Villa Rosa. Now, where that block of flats is, as you go up to the shrubbery, with the nice bridge, and there's a block of 7-8 story block, 1970s block. That is on the site of Villa Rosa. This was one of the 4 great mansions on the hillside, most appallingly demolished in the 70s when planners were pretty awful. And he also built the new St Nicholas Church in Uphill. Well, at least he built this part of it, that funny carboniferous bit that was added later. But interestingly, Uphill didn't have as much money as Bath. James Wilson had built this church in Uphill. Look at that tower. This is his church in Uphill. This was the church he designed for St Stephen's Lansdowne Hill in Bath, which is the photographs make them look the same, but in St Stephen's, much taller, much grander, Bath, much more money. So St Nicholas Uphill was a sort of watered-down version of St Stephen's Lansdowne Hill. But it just shows here in Weston and in Uphill we were bringing in these well-known architects from elsewhere to give us some prestigious development. But this is the man who really solved the problem with Weston's Town Hall. You see, Henry Davis, the clerk to the commissioners, who was a developer as well, as I mentioned, he just happened to own a field on the edge of Weston, which he claimed would be the ideal position for the town hall. Now, if the town clerk happens to own a field which he thinks is the best location for the town hall, alarm bells begin ringing. And everybody in Weston was up in arms about it. There were huge public meetings, people refusing to accept this. And vitriolic meetings. I mean, public meetings today are so calm and polite, even by Facebook standards. People are polite. In those days, if you upset a Victorian audience, the language was appalling. I mean, it could end up in fights. It was really. Anyhow, local people were determined they were not going to pay a rate to build a town hall. They were not going to allow Henry Davis to make a quick buck out of this. So the rector of Weston, who was also Archdeacon of Wells, who had a bob or two in his family, don't forget his dad was the bishop, his uncle was the Governor General of India, so they weren't an Ellenborough family who were present. He simply said, look, I'm fed up with everybody in Weston-super-Mare moaning and groaning and arguing, I'll pay for it. And the rector paid for the town hall to be built. So we have a town hall as a result of us moaning and groaning and forcing the parish priest to pay for it. So we could do it, if we've done it once, perhaps, could we restore Burnbeck Pier? So, and this plaque is in what was the assembly room of the town hall and is now the council chamber, commemorating the Archdeacon's generosity. And he was a generous man. He provided all sorts of social things in schools and so on. Interestingly, the room in which that plaque is was built specifically as an assembly room for the benefit of local people. All town halls had assembly rooms where you could gather for all sorts of things, banquets, dinners, dances, speeches, parties. It was not necessarily part of the council chamber. In fact, in many cities, the assembly room was a completely separate entity, and the council could not control it. Now, of course, it's the council chamber, and you look at a modern town hall, there's absolutely nowhere in a town hall today for the public to gather. So we've lost that idea of people meeting in their town hall. Here's Henry Law, and this is his coat of arms in the stained glass at St John's Church, where he was the rector. Or at least it's his dad's coat of arms. His dad was the bishop, so hence the mitre, the cross of St Andrew, and the Law Edinburgh arms quartered there. Hans Price was then brought in to extend the town hall. It wasn't empire built. The extending of town halls and civic offices is seldom anything to do with empire building. It's usually to do with more work. There's more work to be done, so you need more office space. So you build more office space. And 1898, the council had many more duties to perform, and therefore Hans Price, the local architect, was brought in to extend the building. So he is the second architect, and a particularly great architect, local person. And this is the result of his work. This is his extension, and he changes the clock tower, makes it grander. Then, come 1929, it's extended again. This time because Hans Price is now dead, but his succeeding company is Fry, Patterson and Jones, who had their offices in Waterloo Street, and so they build an extension in what was described as post office Georgian style. So that style, you can see, is so different from that. This is the council in the late 1920s saying, yep, we need an extension, but let's make it of this age, because mock Georgian was fashionable then. Okay, it was going back to get some inspiration, but just see, have a look at Hans Price's clock tower. If I go back, you can see what they've done. They've simply wrapped around it, very cleverly, with that extension of 1929. And so that's the facade we see nowadays. But it was quite a complex of buildings, because you had the town hall here, Emmanuel Church there, and then the Albert Memorial Hall here, which was part of the Emmanuel Church campus. And that was both a church hall and a museum before the museum moved into the boulevard. So that was a sort of civic estate. It looked a bit like a proper town centre. Town hall, church, museum, the sort of things you'd find in Weston doesn't have a proper centre. It's sort of higgledy-piggledy and stretched along the seafront, but where is the centre? And this is the Albert Memorial Hall, demolished 1980, and that's where the present town hall extension is. On reflection, very pity that went rather than was incorporated. And that's the building that went up in 1980, which is not exactly a thing of beauty and joy forever, but there we are. It's a brick extension of that period, and today they've altered it again, put a new entrance in, and clearly one of the problems with architecture today is there's never enough money to devote to making a grand entrance. With the Victorians, when you went into a Victorian civic building, it was, hey, I'm entering this great portico. We're almost apologetic nowadays with our doorways, aren't we? And so the doorway is this sort of funny thing that just sort of goes through a hole in the wall. It's not making any grand statement. It's not saying, hey, this is the town hall. It's a sort of entrance to Tesco. And the same with modern hotels. I mean, you go to something like the Premier Inn, and there's the most apologetic door, which isn't saying, this is our hotel, welcome. It's funny. New council chamber upstairs. This is where the council used to meet. That's now called the old council chamber. All of this furnishing has been taken out, and that carpet, which looks as though it came straight from a saloon bar in a pub, that's gone. And this room now actually is quite handsome because it's a big space, and this is where weddings are conducted. It's too small for the council. Well, interestingly, it's too small for the council to meet, except that the council numbers have been reduced. So instead of having 61 councillors, North Somerset now only has 50, which could easily be accommodated in that chamber. But time to move on. And the new chamber was opened in what was Henry Law's assembly room. So this was opened when Avon was created and Woodspring was created, and then when Woodspring was abolished, North Somerset came into being, and was government money to create this new chamber, and so they did. The trouble is with that sort of chamber, it's fine for a meeting, you can't do anything else with it. So it has no public use potential whatsoever. But here's this reminds us it's still a town hall. The commissioners came to an end in 1894. Local government was changing, and here they are sat. I think they're having a bit of a joke here. These are the last commissioners. When they came into being, it was really kicking the Smith Pigotts out. So where is this final photograph being taken? Sitting in front of Grove House, where the Smith Pigotts had reigned supreme, and which for 2 years they had turned into a library before the opening of the Boulevard Library. So, and these men, looking at men, it's always men. There were no women politicians then, and clearly beards are very fashionable. But the man here, or the younger of the brethren, Samuel Harvey, is said to become the first chairman of a new council. And this is the new council. It's an urban district council, created in 1894. That lasted until 1937, when Weston, having grown, became a borough, and Henry Butt became the charter mayor or the first mayor of the borough. It's pure administration, nothing more, except that if you become a borough, you have more power to do your own things. And so it was a question of, all politics is a question of power. And if you can gather more power into your area, then you can do more things that you want to do, rather than somebody else telling you what to do. And here's Henry Butt receiving that charter from the King, saying, you are now a borough, you may have a mayor, you may have a mace. And here is Henry Butt receiving the charter from the Lord Lieutenant, who was then the Marquis of Bath, in the bandstand, because Weston didn't have a grand banqueting place, so the bandstand. And again, there's something, it's a bit sort of jokey, but it's a seaside town and bands play, so why not use a bandstand? And of course the mayors of all the surrounding towns and cities turn up. And Weston was proud. It became master of its own destiny. So there, briefly, is what happened. We had the town commissioners in operation for 52 years. We then had the urban district council ruling place for 43 years. In 1902, the parish of Milton, which was in the parish of Cewstoke, it was never a parish in its own right, even though it had been a manor, it was part of Cewstoke, but in 1902 it was taken away from Cewstoke and put into Weston. Then in 1933 the separate civil parishes of Uphill and Worl also became part of Weston. But Weston was growing, and therefore these villages on the outskirts became. So by 1937 Weston was quite big, because it had taken in these other villages, and so it became large enough to be created a borough. And it remained a borough for 37 years until Parliament took the fancy of changing everything around, and we had that peculiar invention of something called Avon, but it actually made a bit of sense in that it's a city region in the classic sense. Bristol's in the middle, and then you lob off a bit of South Gloucestershire and a bit of North Somerset and put it all into this greater Bristol region, which unfortunately named it after a cosmetic firm, and nobody quite liked it. And 2 tiers of government, the county, and then a district called Woodspring, in which Weston was part, but no more than a third part. So from that moment onwards, 1974, Weston lost control of its own destiny, and thereafter has continued to lose its control, because even when in 1996 Avon and Woodspring were abolished, North Somerset was created as a unitary authority in charge of everything, but Weston was still just a part of North Somerset. both in terms of its councillors and its power. A third of the councillors from Weston make up North Somerset. So 2/3 of the councillors are not from Weston. So Weston doesn't have control over its own destiny, even though it has a town council that only has very limited powers. So that's it. That's the way it is. To go with civic pride, not just building town halls, but there's a great deal of pride in heraldic devices. Families have shields and so on. It goes back to those days when knights in armour couldn't be recognised wearing all their tin, and so you had to paint the shields and paint the tin, so you knew who you were about to kill or not kill. And this has moved into municipal heraldry as well. So just a passing point, if anyone is interested. The very first badge of Weston was drawn like that. Fish, obvious. Setting sun, obvious. Boat, obvious. Tree from Worldbury, obvious. So that's a sort of stylised shield. We then get a proper coat of arms, which is registered with the College of Heralds, with the hill there, so Worldbury Hill, the sea there, the shield there from there, a helmet, because that's a sign of being heraldically acceptable, on top of which the mantling and an island with a lighthouse. So it's obviously Flatholm, with a seagull flying in front of it, pooing on whoever's underneath. Bit odd in terms of politics, because Flatholm is in Wales. Steepholm is actually in Weston. But they put a Welsh island on a Western coast. And then we have these two gentlemen who are supporters. A Western fisherman, complete with his galoshes and sou'wester, and a rather good-looking gentleman who is supposed to have been an Iron Age person living up on Worldbury Hill, who doesn't look at all Iron Age, looks rather slim, beard and moustache, clearly well trimmed. And it was later decided this really wasn't very good. And so in 1960, a new coat of arms was designed, and I'll show a little more of that in a minute. Somerset, on the other hand, has some really good things. But then when Avon came into being, they created a special coat of arms for Avon. And I won't bore you with the details, except that Avon invented a new animal, a new heraldic beast which had never been seen in heraldry before. It's the sea stag. It's a half stag with a fish tail. And that's an invented creation of Avon County Council, and that has now gone into, even though Avon no longer exists, that creature has gone into heraldic art as something that's there now forever. Of course, we've gone into simpler ages. People go, let's get rid of all this rubbish of coats of arms. When Woodspring was created, it simply had 5 W's to signify the 5 bits that came into it. Woodspring, Long Ashton, Weston, Long Ashton, Clevedon, Portishead, Flaxbourton, parts of Axbridge, those were the W's. And then the latest one, of course, the North Somerset Dragon, which was sort of designed by some junior school kid and doesn't look at all ferocious and isn't going to frighten anyone. If you're going to have a dragon, for God's sake, it's got to breathe fire and brimstone and actually frighten you. And that's a very effete thing. So, and along with it comes all the civic insignia. I'm always very careful not to say regalia. Regalia can only be worn by kings, from the Latin. It's insignia. The North Somerset insignia with its pathetic little attempt at a dragon. There's, of course, I've reached the top of it, and the mace. The mace is an interesting thing. North Somerset doesn't have a mace, doesn't need one. Western Wales, the Borough Council, needed one because the mace represents the authority of the Crown. It's why in Parliament, in front of the Speaker and on the table is the mace. And the mace is there to let politicians know that in our country they do not have ultimate power. Their power is power through the Crown. and take the mace away, and Parliament can't sit. It's like in the town council, take the mace away, no, the town council, they leave it locked up and don't actually bring it into the chamber. But that's the significance of the mace. It comes from the days, of course, when knights in armour bashed you on the head with it. Now it's just the Royal Arms. So, but coming to the Western Arms, it is actually, I think, a very commendable work of heraldic art. Again, Welbury Hill is here. These little white things signify the encampment on Welbury Hill, the Iron Age fortress. The coat of arms, the shield, quite clearly shows Weston's maritime location, even though the ship is a little stylised, but we're on the coast. The sunset, Turner came to this area painting, and we all know, sunsets in Weston can be stunningly beautiful, can't they? When the sun is going down over there and the tide is in, you've got this incredible orange glow, and that really attracted an artist. So there. This is a bit of artistic license, because somebody once referred to Weston-super-Mare as being a fair white city next the Severn Sea. Well, okay, you can use a bit of imagination, but I don't really see Weston as being a fair white city. Mine became a castle, there we are. Then the usual thing on the top, the shield, the mantling, and we've still got the cuckoo and flashed on the lighthouse. But the supporters here are now interesting, because these are from the manor. You've got the Smith beast on the one side, and the Piggott beast on the other side, holding the shield from falling. But around their necks, you've got the shields of the previous lords of the manor, the Arthur family there, and the Winter family there. So the entire history of Weston's manorial past is there in that badge, and I think it's a fascinating bit of heraldry, if you like that sort of thing. As for the motto, well, in heraldic law in England, mottos can be changed willy-nilly. Prince of Wales has Dean, I serve, the Queen has Aniswati Malipos. I have no idea why Weston chose Ever Forward, other than it sounds quite good. But I wonder if, because Birmingham's motto is forward, did Weston, as the seaside resort for Birmingham people, thought, well, if Birmingham's forward, we are ever forward. I don't know who came up with it. But it's an interesting design, as opposed to the proper Somerset Dragon and our North Somerset Dragon. There we are. Okay, so councils, and when they started, education didn't belong to councils. Education was provided privately by the church. And here is Weston's first church school in Lower Church Road, where the college now stands. Looking up Lower Church Road to New St John's School, it's the National School. The national schools were operated by the Church of England. The British schools were operated by the Nonconformist churches. So here's Weston's brand new school, 1846. Remember, this is only 5 years after the railway had arrived, so it's still a small but growing town. Certainly I remember, well, I must remember this, but I took this photograph. Not in 1846, but this is the school and the row of hotels with the School of Science and Art there, before it was demolished to make way for the present college. So there we have, the National School became known as St John's School. It was then demolished, and around the corner, the British School for the Nonconformists was in Hopkins Street. It's still there, but of course it's no longer a school, being converted into residential use. So you had division in education then between those who were Anglican children and those who were non-conforming children, Methodist, Baptist, whatever. You then had private education, and the largest of the private schools in Weston, which opened specifically as a school, was the college on the seafront, 1857. Mr. Elwell, I don't know who that is sitting, I don't know if that looks to me like some kid who's scarping out of school. But there it is, on the seafront, the new school at Westminster, which morphed into that in 1889. Look carefully, you'll see where it is. Here, let's go back. There. Before, it was closed as a school and turned into a hotel with the addition of these sort of baronial Scottish end bits. Arguably the only grand hotel in Weston which really looks like a significant seaside hotel. Pity about the way it's run now, but that's a different story. And that's it. Now, two people who were very influential in education for two completely different reasons in Weston: Archdeacon George Denison and Professor Francis Newman. Archdeacon Denison was the vicar of East Brent. He was the man who invented the harvest home by getting all his parishioners together, no matter whether it was the squire or the farm labourers, all to sit at common benches, at common tables, all to eat the same food, drink the same cider, eat the same cheese and have a merry good time. So in that respect, he was also a working priest. Not only was the rector, but he also farmed his own land. So he was up at 4 every morning farming. He also managed to avoid cholera getting into the village by providing fresh water well for all the parishioners. He knew before science realised there was a link between foul water and cholera. So he was a competent person, but he had this feeling that education should be the preserve of the church, and the state should have no interference in education whatsoever. So he fought bitterly against the state having a role in education. On the other hand, Professor Francis Newman, who lived in Southside and was one of the country's leading academics, but happened to live in Weston, and was the brother of John Henry Newman, who is now Saint John Henry Newman, Cardinal Newman. He and his Catholic brother loathed each other, so they just didn't talk. His brother wrote hymns like Lead Kindly Night amidst the encircling doom, wrote The Dream of Gerontius. But he was passionately in favour of state involvement in education, and passionately in favour of a liberal education rather than one which was too narrow. So these two giants, who were not just giants locally, but they were nationally significant. And when they came together to debate, my gosh, the people turned up to listen. These were powerful people in Weston. Weston managed to withstand the Education Act for 20 years. In 1874, the Forster Act had been passed, giving councils the ability to open local authority schools. Weston was 20 years before it decided to open a local authority school. And the first one was this, Walliscott School, again built by Hans Fowler Price in the Prussian style, we are told. Obviously you recognise it as being a Prussian building, don't you? And it's still essentially the same today. And just down the road in Locking Road, there wasn't as much money to devote to it, but the Locking Road School was built. Again, Hans Fowler Price. It was then converted into Windsor Girls' School, it was then converted into Wyvern Lower School, it was then sold and converted into residential accommodation. So I used to teach here. The idea of being able to teach surrounded by all this wonderful greenery, that was a tarmac playground. And St Saviour's Church next door. With these wonderful additions in the schools, these rather iconic Fowler rooftops. Right way up then, state education went right the way through. In the 1930s, Weston built its own grammar school. And this was in the days when people came from outside Weston to be educated inside Weston, because we had the only grammar school in the area. That, of course, then changed with comprehensive education. It became Broad Oak Comprehensive School, was then demolished, and the new Broad Oak Comprehensive School, again in the Tesco style of architecture, was put up. But this is the grammar school. Interesting building, 1930s building, central driveway, clock tower. They had the option of having a swimming pool or a clock tower, and they chose to have a clock tower. The clocks never told the right time. 4 clocks told 4 different. Hopeless. Girls' school on this side, boys' school on that side, and the only place they could meet was the bicycle sheds at the front.
So which way's the Bridgewater Road?
This is the Bridgewater Road,
Ah,
which had just been opened. That's the uphill bypass. And there you can see the old Windwhistle Lane there. This would be Devonshire Road here,
Yeah.
Broad Oak Road there, Uphill Road there. And I suspect this photograph was taken before the school opened. Was there nobody actually in it? And state education has taken us right the way through to the latest schools we have. The private schools, of course, have all bar one gone. They've gone for a number of reasons, not just educationally, but financially. I mean, people, where well-heeled middle-class families were prepared to pay for their sons and daughters to be educated in local school, private schools, that's gone. So these big schools, particularly which educated the children of people in the colonial civil service, you know, dads out in India, sending kids to a school in Western to be educated. Those have gone. So Kingsholm School, that's gone. That's now a block of flats at the top of Arundel Road. Lara Trade School, that's gone, even if I can't spell it. Lara, try it. So that's my fault, and I'm prepared to admit that's an appalling spelling mistake. Particularly put on a school photograph, that's even quite indefensible. No, but actually it's Mr. Hancock's pictures, I'll blame him for it. No, Laura Trade School in South Road, run by the Catholic Order, that's gone. That's inside, how schools have changed. St Peter's School, that's gone totally. This is where Roald Dahl was educated, where John Cleese was, and it's now St Peter's Avenue and St Matthew's Close at the end of the shrubbery. 1970s expensive bungalows. The school completely gone. And right up to here we are in the college. This magnificent Hans Price School of Science and Art if you've not done it, if there's a nice day, go around sometime with a camera and just for the detailing on that building. You could easily take 50, 60 photographs of different bits of the architecture. It's staggeringly good. And you can see here, looking down Lower Church Road before those hotels went, or the houses in St John's School. When it was demolished, St John's School was demolished. That's the site in the late 60s. That's the new college, which went up in the brutal style, quite clearly in the brutal style, isn't it? Brutal meaning not that it's ugly, but brutal that concrete is bare. This is the era of Le Corbusier, people like that, saying that let's not pretend that concrete is anything other than concrete. So let's show it in all its grey brutality. Let's
It's a prison in black and white.
quite. And that's it now. Of course, it's still the same shell. No, it's still the same core. The shell has been somewhat changed and warmed with its curves and its colouring. And of course, we all know the University Centre has gone on and on to much greater things. The campus at Boxton Road, the new skills centre in Locking Road, and of course the building which we're in here as part of the Law and Professional Studies Academy. The church was still important in education, and it was still important in the ordering of social life, for better or for worse. And here we have the second Anglican church to be built in Weston, Emmanuel, in Oxford Street. Interesting, when this was built, it was partly because the congregation at St John's, which was the parish church, didn't like the idea of the lower orders going to the Methodist chapel. But they didn't want them to come to St John's because St John's people were really rather snooty. And so they decided they'd better have another Anglican church down in the town for the lower orders. So Emmanuel became the place where those who weren't quite good enough to go up the hill would go. You know, it's the way it was. It's easy for us to laugh about it, but it's the way it was. So handsome building, and this was the challenge from the Western people were becoming increasingly non-conformist. They were a bit rebellious. You know, during the Civil War, local people had favoured Cromwell over the king. So West Country people were always a bit sort of anti the establishment. And here's one of the early chapels that had been built in York Street. Nothing exists of it now. But the Methodists, they were appealing very much to the merchant classes, the shopkeeper classes, all of whom committed themselves to paying for their church buildings. So here's the first of the big Methodist churches. It didn't last very long because the congregation got too large, and so it was converted into a bank. Look very carefully, you can still see the remnants of the church. So from God to Mammon in one easy go. 1846. The congregation then moved from there to a new site for the Victorian Methodist Church. They needed a bigger church. Down the High Street, there was another independent, non-conformist chapel, quite a handsome little building, of which a little bit still remains there, at the side of Poundland. If you go up Cambridge Place, the little lane going up to North Street, that's all that's left of those windows. So when you go into Poundland, you will be going in through one of the doors of the chapel which is there. That changed, closed, moved into a place called the Cabbage Patch on the new boulevard, and that's now the United Reformed Church opposite the Mercury office. So that moved the congregation along. The Baptist, their first Baptist church, 1850, Wadham Street, then they moved to another one, another Baptist church, Bristol Road Baptist Church, 1866.
We just got smoking group there, and yesterday I asked if you could take me to the bell tower and everything. He showed me all around yesterday.
You've been up there?
Yeah. You can't get up there now because they've boarded it all
Yes.
off, but he took me up the church thing to show me it and
Right.
everything. It was really interesting.
Because this has always fascinated me, why non-conformist churches have bell towers. Because the only church which by law must have a bell is the Church of England, because it's the state church, and it must signify when it's holding divine office, because everyone has the right to attend. Whether they ring the bell or not is a different thing.
I was in there yesterday.
Well, right. But that to me, I mean, Hans Farrer Price built this, but that to me isn't a church. That to me is a mosque. That looks like a minaret. And he'd spent a holiday in North Africa, so there's a bit of influence coming through his architecture there. I mean, if you were to show somebody a photograph of just that bit and say, what's that? It's somewhere in Egypt, isn't it? Or it's, fascinating. This is the new Victorian Methodist Church. So this is a view from the town hall, that's down to the station. What a pity we got rid of all these wonderful cast drinking fountains and things. But this is the big, really big, again, this huge spire. Mind you, this is the Methodist Church saying to the Church of England, ha ha ha, we're closer to God than you. Feet up and up and up. It's all about showing off. But then it caught fire. Good old Western tradition. Up it went in flames, and they built a new one. So the present church, a bit of an old building. Architecturally, the significant bit is that tower. It's an incredibly beautiful tower when you look at it. But it's not a Western building. It's built off this really lovely, mellow, nailsy stone and hand stone. But that to me looks like a cathedral. They must have spent a fortune on a tower which has never ever had a single bell in it. the heating apparatus is in it. The Roman Catholics, on the other hand, they were a bit beyond the pale. We'd had the Reformation, there was revolution in France. People were a bit concerned that Catholicism somehow equalled republicanism and revolution, and therefore Catholics were a bit sort of dubious. But when the Lord of the Manor became a Catholic, oh, the balloon went up in Weston, and he'd given them a bit of land up on the hill to build a Catholic church, but it had to be built on the hill, out of the town, otherwise local people here who were so prejudiced would have raised merry hell. And the magistrates refused to sentence some youths who threw windows through bricks of the windows because they'd been encouraged to do it. And he thought that was a good thing. When Catholic nuns came to Weston for the first time in High Street, signs were put up in the shop saying no Roman candles served here. That goes back almost like those Enoch Powell days of no black served in there. That sort of. But Weston was an incredibly prejudiced place, and if you were Catholic, you were beyond the pale. By the time the 20s and 30s arrived, we're becoming much more liberal, much more open, and therefore Catholicism in Weston can build its new church, Corpus Christi, opposite Edinburgh Park. Not only can it build it, but instead of pretending it's an English building like St Joseph's up on the hill, it can actually say, hang on, we're actually Italian. And this is an Italian facade in the 1920s style, proclaiming what it is and not being frightened. So we're becoming a little more tolerant. Right up till today, of course, where any old design is a church, be it St Mark's out of the world or the new Milton Baptist Church, which again is in that Tesco School of Architecture, isn't it? I mean, couldn't have seen. Anything there to indicate a church, supermarket, petrol station? That sort of thing is a public lavatory, except it's got a cross on the top, so it really isn't a loo. But the emphasis, the emphasis is either the sacrament or the word. So it's either the altar or it's the pulpit. It's smells and bells or it's repentance. And today, these are not issues which divide us. But in the 1920s and 30s in Weston, even though we were becoming more liberal, it was a time. At one point, this is All Saints Church on the hill. At one point, the police had to be sent up because extreme Protestants were very angry that incense was being burned in the Church of England. Now, can you imagine calling the police out to a church service on a Sunday here because people are being so aggressive? But people were passionate, and they joined organisations which were passionate. And three of the great protagonists in Weston, William Baedeker, who lived in Queen's Road, his cousin was the person who invented the German Baedeker Guide to the railway network. He was extremely evangelical. He went off to Russia in an attempt to convert the Orthodox peasantry to the Baptist movement. Well, you can imagine, he didn't succeed. The Earl of Cavan, who lived in the Lodge, which no longer exists, at the top of Manor Road, now the Lodge Estate, he was a great evangelical, and James Darr, who started the Mercury, he was. And they were all involved in all sorts of Masonic organisations. The Masons were very powerful in Weston, very. And this is All Saints Church, arguably the finest piece of ecclesiastical architecture in Weston, in that it was designed by this man, George Bodley. George Bodley, who was the country's leading architect for the neo-14th century. He was president of the Royal Institute of British Architects. He designed the great Washington National Cathedral, Washington DC. He was the overseeing architect for the new Liverpool Anglican Cathedral, that was too old to actually see it through. One of the great architects. They brought him into Weston to design All Saints. But they had a great procession all the way around town. And on the way up the hill, they had to go past the Masonic Lodge, which is now the Constitutional Club. He was a great Mason. Masons were very powerful in the way Weston evolved. The church, of course, had been traditionally the organisation of burying people, but the population was getting so large, it was impossible to cope with the dead. If you were wealthy, you were buried in the church, so they lifted a flagstone, pop you down there. If you weren't wealthy, you were buried in the churchyard. But more and more people were living, more and more people therefore were dying, but there was no more space to bury people. So churchyards and church buildings themselves were becoming putrefying places of seeping liquid from corpses. I mean, really bad places. And so Parliament passed the Burial Act in 1852, giving councils the duty to make sure there were suitable burial places. So within 4 years, Weston had decided to open its own municipal burial ground, Milton Road Cemetery. And this is the chapel that was there. Mind you, there were two chapels. If you were Anglican, you could go to the Lord through one chapel, but if you were nonconformist, you had to go to the Lord through a different chapel. And the bishop insisted that he didn't mind a nonconformist chapel being built next to the Anglican one, providing the gap between them was at least 6 inches. So somehow there'd be contamination. But Weston Cemetery became the sort of place you visited, not just because the dead were there, but because it was a park. It was laid out. This was the Victorian idea. You spent time wandering around these wonderful cemeteries, looking at the architecture of the monuments and admiring the flowers and the trees. And we have the finest monkey puzzle in England, actually in Weston Cemetery.
There's actually a palm tree in the church.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Funny the things that do grow in Weston. And this is the cemetery chapel today. The non-conformist bit's gone. Again, handsome building, but they needed a bell. And instead of buying a new bell or having one cast, they went on a sort of eBay expedition and got Queen Charlotte's bell from her chapel in London, which had been turned into a cinema and had been turned into a theatre. And so they took the bell, brought it back to Weston, put it in the chapel here. So Queen Charlotte's bell actually is in Weston Cemetery Chapel. And the church cemeteries then took on a lesser role. Interestingly, if a church has a cemetery, it can order the council to maintain the grounds. And so St John's and St Martin's Well and St Nicholas, both old and new.
It's still true that once a churchyard is full, the upkeep of it's over the council.
It doesn't even have to be full. A churchyard which had burials before the Municipal Burial Act, the parochial church council has the right to order the civil council to maintain it.
Don't they recycle it every 100 years now? That's what I
Sorry?
was told. They put new bodies in every 100 years.
Oh no, well that's a different issue. That depends on the ownership of the land. Weston Cemetery, you can buy a grave in perpetuity. You can buy it for 70 years. You can buy it, those which are in perpetuity you own, freehold property. Those which are rented at the end of your 70 years down there rotting, somebody else goes on top of you, which makes it very difficult putting new headstones. Well, sometimes you'll find headstones don't actually relate to the people in there, or the people in there have gone. Of course, in the old days they had charnel houses, much simpler. So after somebody had been in there for some time, you simply took the bones out and put them in the charnel house, and then you use the pit for somebody else. But anyhow, the cemetery soon became full, and so more land was acquired, taking in the old Ashcombe House area, and with a new entrance from the Milton Road, where the cemetery lodge had been the gatehouse to Ashcombe House, which was the Capel family home mansion before the First War. So our cemetery, from Milton Road down, from Bristol Road down to Milton Road, has two gate lodges, the one at the top, which was actually built for the cemetery, and the one at the bottom, which was built as the entrance lodge to the great Ashcombe House. Then there was an idea, for a new cemetery. Sorry, it's a bad photo, it's taken from the old document, which was going to be created in the Moorland Road, in the Severn Road area. That was going to be a new municipal cemetery, and all that we've got is a plan of it, and nothing ever happened. Then the councils were given responsibility for water supply. The oldest water supply in Weston was the private one in the Shrubbery. That lasted until the 1890s. 1854, Montpellier Reservoir was opened at the top of Montpellier, it's still there. The water was pumped up from Ashcombe. You obviously had to pump the water, get the water up to get the pressure for it to go back down. And then in 1866, the Wilbury Hill Reservoir was built further up, giving more pressure. By 1887, the Waterworks Company had become the property of the Board of Health, which is part of the council. So the council became responsible for clean water supply. Later on, of course, government privatised it, so you've got things like Bristol Waterworks, private entity. And getting rid of the nasty stuff. Well, the easiest thing was dumping in the river or in the sea. And in Weston, our sewage, we built a pipeline in 1842, which went as far as the parish boundary. So Weston Nasties went down a sort of pipe to the parish boundary with Uphill, and we simply emptied it into the Great Uphill Reed. We passed it to Uphill, and it came down through here. So Uphill had to put up with Weston Nasties. We then in 1852...
Still?
We then in 1852 built depositing tanks, which sounds rather nice. It's where the poo was deposited, and you let it sort of drain away, and the liquid you could then send off into the Reen, but the solids you could put on a farm cart and take it on the land, so it helped fertilise, and so tomatoes grew everywhere. The human digestive system can't break down the tomato. 1856. The Drove Road disinfecting works. So the poo could be disinfected, and then it went into a pipe to be carried on through to Uphill. So they simply got disinfected crap down here rather than the original. So all of this was highly unsatisfactory. We were beginning to learn the link between all of this and, of course, cholera. So along comes, I mean, this is amazing. Potty Little Weston Superman brings in Sir Joseph Bazalgette. Now, he was the man who had built the embankment in London when Parliament couldn't meet 1 July because of the stink, the poo in the Thames. It was called the Great Stink. Parliament could not sit, the smell was so bad. So Joseph Bazalgette, amazing civil engineer, built the whole of the London sewage system. We brought him to Weston, and he built our system, completely new pipe system, with an outfall at Blackrock, and it went out on an ebbing tide. And that's the system we had up until fairly recently, and it's the system we still use, except we now pump everything to the other side, Bleedon, where it's completely treated. It comes back and it's put out into the sea there as pure water. But it's still based on Sir Joseph Bazalgette's original idea. That was amazing. When people are ill, what do? Well, you call an ambulance. This is Weston's first ambulance. By the time this was the next ambulance by 1905. Here we are with St John Ambulance running the service. In 1960, before a county ambulance service came in, St John closed, and the county ambulance service came in to operate a new national ambulance service. But what if people were ill and went to hospital? We haven't got hospitals until 1857. Hans Fowler Price builds the first hospital in Weston, which was known as the Alfred Street Dispensary. It had 7 beds, and extended, you can see 16 beds, then by 1870, 20 beds. And this was actually quite ahead of its time, because this was the same era the Guys were opening a hospital in London. So Weston was still very much. Weston was very much in the forefront. I mean, we look at it now and laugh, but that in its time was quite modern. We then also, to look after people with chest diseases, invented this idea of a sanatorium. And sanatoriums were favourably built on the coast, so you could open the windows and get fresh air. It was assumed that chest diseases were the result of poor air, and therefore you got rid of these. We didn't understand about cancers and things like that. So fresh air was the thing. So open the windows and give everyone fresh air. So we built a sanatorium. Well, we took over a pub on the beach. It was the halfway in, pub between Weston and Uphill, and converted it into this, the Royal West of England Sanatorium. Still there. But then we needed a new general hospital. In 1928, we opened the Queen Alexandra Memorial Hospital in the Boulevard. 1928, this is still pre-NHS. And this is opened as a result largely of Henry Butt going around raising money to build a hospital. Can you imagine in Weston today coming around to all the people saying, come on, I'm coughing a few bob, we're going to build ourselves a new hospital. When it opened, it was an incredibly new thing. People have never seen a hospital of such quality on the Boulevard, named after the late Queen Alexandra. Nobody ever called it that. Of course, we all call it just the General or the Hospital, the Boulevard Hospital. And we also had the Isolation Hospital, 1905, which is now part of the Education Service, in the Boulevard, still there, built next to the disinfecting tank for the sewer. Can you imagine? This is an isolation hospital for people with communicable diseases, isolated from Weston, so they put them next to this stinking... but there we are. Dealing with mental problems. This hotel, this is now a mental hospital for people with mental disturbance. But when it opened at Custoke, it was opened by the Birmingham Hospital Saturday Fund in the late 20s as a convalescent hospital. This was a new idea, that if you lived in a city and you'd been to have an operation, you needed a fortnight's convalescence. And so you came to places like Custoke to convalesce. Nowadays you go to hospital, 2 minutes later you're kicked out and told to go home, and the idea of having a fortnight's convalescence by the seaside has long since gone. And in 1986, all these hospitals, apart from Custoke, which is now a private psychiatric hospital, they all closed and they were subsumed into the new Western Hospital at Uphill. If your house catches fire, well, you call the fire brigade. Here is Weston's early fire brigade. Why is it photographed at the town hall? Because that's where the fire station was. Here is the fire station. At the back of the town hall, formed in 1846 as a volunteer brigade, partly because when Knightstone Bath burned down, or the earlier Bath burned down, they had to send for a fire engine from Banwell, and the fire engine couldn't get here until they caught the horses to pull the fire engine. By the time it got here, the fire had done its worst. Weston didn't have its own fire engine. So 1846, we established our own volunteer fire brigade. And this is a photograph of it, 1880. And this is where it was. That's the town hall. This today is the curved buildings opposite, the shops. This is Victoria Methodist Church there. This became the Magistrates' Court and the police station. You can see there, it's a nursery. This is Walliscote Grove Road that goes right the way through today. That's the town hall extension. That's Albert Memorial, Emmanuel Church, and tucked here at the side of the town hall, fire engine house. That's where the first fire station was. These three buildings are still there. We call them Rose Lawn. Those three have gone. That's a little car park opposite the town hall. And here they are in their brand new fire station in 1901. This is a 1910 photograph, but the fire station opened in 1901. You all know where that is. It's here, being demolished in 1960, next to the Central Cinema. You'll still know where that is, because that's it today. The fire brigade moved to a new fire station in the Sunlands, and this was the design of their new divisional headquarters. The council also became responsible for providing gas. Here's the very first gas works, 1841, right next door to Emmanuel Church. So you can imagine the contamination in the town centre. 1841, and that's the site as it was gradually developed on the site today. That's where our first gas works were. And when the developers couldn't build this bit, they were building all the rest, and I asked the Director of Development, why is it taking so long? He said, there's a land contamination issue and nobody can understand why. Why didn't you just ask a historian? It's where the gasworks were. Ah, they didn't know. Because in fact just found contaminated land and had no idea. And this became the gasworks, our principal gasworks, 1856, lasted right up to 1968, one of the biggest gasworks in the west of England. And here is the man sawing off the last hooter. And that's the end of the gasworks, the end of the trains trundling over Drove Road, carrying coal, was a coal-fired gas station. And in the last couple of years, the last of those gas holders has come down, though the gas manager's house is still there. That's a private house in Drove Road. And the gas light company buildings in Burlington Street, the offices and the stores, of course, have turned into a museum. Electricity came rather late to Weston, 1901. This is the electricity power station. There. That's Locking Road. This is the railway line. All of this today would be the Solomons. That's the railway, that's the Western Cleveland Portishead Light Railway there. Designed by Sidney Wilde, who was a colleague of Hans Price. This is where the power station and tram depot were. Because the electricity that was being generated at night time for use by the public could be generated and used during the daytime to drive the trams. So it made economic sense. So power station and tram depot together. Here are the Western trams, going on the seafront, opposite Town Hall. The Toast Rack tram, you can see why it's called the Toast Rack, up by the old pier. And Beatrice Page conducting the last tram in 1937. Why Beatrice? Because in the war, First War, she became the first woman tram driver in England. So she did her bit for the suffragette movement. And this is a wonderful cartoon of the last tram in Weston. Whenever anything is going to be the last, everybody wants to go on it. Of course, buses were taking over. These were the new buses, well, outside the Town Hall. Though I'm not sure this one ever operated in Weston up until recently. This is the steam bus, Elizabeth. And we then built our own bus station. I say we, the council didn't. It was a private bus station. 1936, demolished 1988. And what happened to the power station and the tram depot? Well, the power station became the doctor's surgery in Locking Road, and the tram depot next door became the Nuffield Gym. At least the sites did. Education moved into reading. Of course, libraries were private. This is the private library that's now Smith's, and they're taking ages to restore the building, aren't they? But up above, there's this wonderful Shakespearean quote: "Come and take choice of all my library, and so beguile thy sorrow." It's up there.
Have you asked them why they're taking a long time?
No.
I did.
And what is it?
The pillars inside WH Smith's,
Yeah.
they found that there isn't any footings underneath the ground, so they're not actually holding the building
Oh
up.
God, right, okay. Yeah, okay, right. And then Price and Wilde were brought in to design a new purpose-built library and museum, 1901, in the Boulevard, and then extended 1932, and next to it, before that hideous telephone exchange, those are the buildings which were there. And that's the building, and it's just in the last week been sold £500,000.
I know.
I can't believe it.
No, I can't believe it.
I find it, I mean, it was only sold 2 years ago, 3 years ago, well, for £500,000, $250,000. And it's, yeah.
What are they going to
Do
do?
they? Yeah.
I
Flats, so it's
all I know is it's been sold, I don't know who's bought it, but it's a housing
But
company.
apparently the original owners put planning permission in to turn it into residential flats or whatever else. but the size of the rooms were far too big for the area and for the amount of cost.
They'd bitten off a bit more than they could chew,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
so they were asked to resubmit their plans
Yeah.
and pay again, and they said, no, we've
Yeah.
had enough of this.
Yeah, but be interesting. And some wonderful, I'm running out of time, so I've just got these are some of the details in the old library by Harry Hems, wonderful national sculptor, well worth looking at. And moving into, if you don't behave, okay, the police deal with you. By the YMCA is where we put the stocks. I've superimposed on, that's how we dealt with the local people. Whipping post on the stocks. Then when the town hall opened, the cells were actually underneath the town hall. These are actual photographs of Weston police then. Don't talk about people misbehaving now and how dreadful it is and how everyone's been butchered in Weston. The police in the 19th century had to be issued with cutlasses to protect themselves at night time. Weston was such a dangerous place. It's a double now. Look at it. These are the local police on cutlass training. How to cut down Weston people who are being a nuisance. Here's the police station in Oxford Street. Here's the new Magistrates Court from the 1930s with this very strong architecture. And into that dreadful 1960s thing, out to the new courthouse. So, I've just done it. Next week, and the week after, these are the topics I want to cover. Weston is heaving with unique architecture, which needs to be celebrated. We also had this period of our heydays in the 20s and 30s, between the two wars, when Weston had such confidence in itself. It did some incredible things, but it also planned all sorts of things which it never materialised. And finally, right up to date, how our heritage is helping to regenerate. And here we are at a very part of the town where that's taking place. So, that's this week's lecture over. See you all next week. Okay. Oh, and Graham told me that he will sort out the YouTube type thing and give the details. So that's great. Okay then, right. I thought I was going to run out of time, but I've just...
I was walking by the room
Yeah.
which I want to do quite often. And I've been to see what used to be wood building style.
Yes.
I remember seeing that years ago, but I wonder how it works. And it was down there. Well, see, you can slip away. Now, I was
There was a bit of a swimming shoulder down there, so yeah, you can sort of plunge in the water. What dangerous. All 3 days health and safety. All the best.
And he said because the pillars that are actually in WH Smith, they found that they're not actually in the ground, so they're not actually holding the building up above them.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I said, are you worried? And they went,
Well, it's like when the college took over a Ross
It's terrible.
they took it and the builder were doing some work and they stopped. They said, hang on, we've got all this weight. Where's the load bearing? They found the previous owners had taken out a load bearing wall and everything was buckling. They also found a plug system. Where's that come from? It was through to a property next door, which wasn't part of it.
have you been down to see the cells in the old town hall?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
The cobble street that's in there and that.
That's,
Yeah, John, the
That's
caretaker,
it,
took me
yeah.
there.
I know just store anything in it.
I know. Fascinating though,
Yeah.
going down there.
Okay.
They had problems with the footings down opposite the town hall, didn't they? Which used to be the nightclub. And that was all closed
Oh,
down.
yes.
And when they started to look at it, they found that when they put the RSJ in, they just left it on the walls
Right,
with ordinary
with nothing.
footing and just cut out the wall.
Right.
It's-
It doesn't bear thinking about it.
I think they stopped the I think they applied for the nightclub to continue. I think they were told, well, if you want it to continue, it's got to be complete, because all the buildings up above were supported by an RSJ, which wasn't actually supported underneath. So that whole row of houses really were at danger. But I don't know whether they've actually ever. They must have repaired it, surely. They'd be forced to, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
building regs now are much stricter. Now, what have I switched off?
You've got to
I don't mind.
was that switch off and
I'm just going to pull it out.
yeah, but everything goes wrong then, doesn't it?
Okay then.
Thank you very much.
Okay, see you next week.